The cruelest invitation is the one sent with a smile. On a warm Friday evening in downtown Chicago, the ballroom of the Grand Monarch Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers and gold lights. Waters moved between guests carrying silver trays of champagne while a string quartet played softly near the stage. Everyone looked like they belonged there. Everyone except Nia Carter. At last, that was what Ethan Brooks wanted people to think. Nia stood near the back of the room in a simple navy dress, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. She had almost thrown the invitation away when it arrived 3 weeks earlier. Ethan's engagement party. The man who had once promised to spend his life with her was now celebrating a future with someone else. She should have ignored it. She knew that. Yet something about the envelope had stopped her. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure. Or maybe something she couldn't explain. Across the room, Ethan laughed with investors and executives. His tailored suit fit perfectly. His confidence filled every corner of the ballroom. When he finally noticed Nia, a slow smile crossed his face. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already won. A few minutes later, he tapped a glass for attention. Conversations faded. The room turned toward him. Ethan wrapped an arm around his fiancée and began thanking everyone for coming. Then his eyes found Nia. "Tonight is special," he said with a grin. "And seeing old faces makes it even more memorable." Several guests turned toward her. Ethan lifted his glass. "Some of you haven't met my ex-wife, Nia. She was part of my life before everything took off." A few polite laughs followed. Ethan continued. "It's nice she could make time to see what success looks like." The laughter grew louder. Nia heard every word. She saw the glances. The smirks. The silent judgments. But she didn't react. She simply reached into her purse and touched a sealed letter she had carried for years. The envelope was worn at the edges. Unopened. Forgotten. Or perhaps avoided. Her thumb rested against the paper as if it carried a pulse of its own. Then her phone vibrated. 11. She glanced at the screen. The message came from a New York law firm she had never heard of. The words were brief. "Ms. Carter, we have been trying to reach you regarding the Sterling estate. Please contact us immediately." Nia stared at the message. Across the ballroom, Ethan was still smiling. He had no idea that before this night was over, a single name would change everything. The noise of the ballroom seemed to fade as Nia stared at the message on her phone. Sterling estate. She read the words twice, then locked the screen and slipped the phone back into her purse. Around here, laughter continued. Glasses clinked. Conversations flowed as if nothing unusual had happened. Ethan was already entertaining another group of guests, completely unaware that a single text message had unsettled her more than his public humiliation ever could. Nia quietly left before the party ended. Outside, the Chicago night air felt cooler than expected. Streetlights reflected across the wet pavement from a brief evening rain. She walked 2 blocks before stopping beneath a glowing pharmacy sign. For several seconds, she simply stood there. Then she opened her purse and removed the old envelope. The paper looked fragile now, its corners softened by years of being carried from apartment to apartment. Her mother's handwriting stretched across the front. Nia had seen those familiar letters countless times. She had just never found the courage to break the seal. 8 years earlier, after her mother passed away, the envelope had been tucked inside a small wooden box along with photographs, receipts, and family keepsakes. Nia remembered sitting alone in her apartment, holding the letter while grief pressed against her chest like a weight she could not move. She had promised herself she would read it someday. Someday became months. Months became years. Life moved on. Bills needed paying. Hopes demanded attention. Then came her marriage. Then came the divorce. Somehow the letter remained unopened through all of it. Back in her apartment at night, Nia placed the envelope on the kitchen table. The city lights beyond her window painted faint reflections across the surface. She made a cup of tea she never drank. She sat down. Stood up. Sat down again. Something about the message from New York made the envelope feel different now, as if two separate pieces of a puzzle had suddenly found each other. Finally, she slid her finger beneath the seal. The paper opened with a quiet tear. Inside was a handwritten letter and a faded photograph. Her breath caught as she picked up the picture. The image showed her mother standing beside an older man she had never seen before. They were smiling. Comfortable. Familiar. On the back, written in blue ink, were 3 words. Richard Sterling. Nia felt a chill travel through her arms. Moments later, her phone rang. The same New York number appeared on the screen. "This Time," she answered. A calm voice introduced himself as attorney Michael Grant. Then he asked a question that made her heart stop. "Ms. Carter, has anyone ever told you why Richard Sterling spent the last 15 years trying to find you?" For several seconds, Nia could not answer. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the faded photograph while the attorney's question echoed in her mind. The man beside her mother no longer looked like a stranger. His smile carried a strange familiarity, something she could not quite explain. Outside her apartment window, the distant sound of traffic drifted through the night, but inside, everything felt unusually still. "No," she finally said. "Nobody ever told me that." On the other end of the line, Michael Grant remained quiet for a moment. "Then there are things you deserve to know, Ms. Carter." Nia tightened her grip on the photograph. Her heart was steady, but her thoughts were racing. "Richard Sterling passed away 6 days ago," Michael said. "Before his death, he instructed our firm to continue searching for you if we had not located you already." Nia looked down at her mother's letter. Questions were piling up faster than answers. "Why would a billionaire spend years looking for me?" she asked. Another pause followed. "That conversation is better had in person." Nia almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the entire situation felt impossible. Less than 3 hours earlier she had been standing in a ballroom while people quietly judged her. Now she was speaking with a Manhattan attorney about one of the wealthiest families in America. It felt like somebody else's story. "You are asking me to fly to New York?" she asked. "I am asking you to hear the truth." The call ended 20 minutes later. Michael arranged a meeting for the following Monday morning. He offered to send transportation and accommodations. Nia declined both. After years of rebuilding her life from the ground up, she had learned to distrust anything that sounded too convenient. When the apartment finally fell silent, she unfolded the rest of her mother's letter. The handwriting flowed across the page with gentle confidence. There were memories of childhood. Stories about hope. Advice about courage. Yet one sentence near the end captured her attention immediately. "If the day ever comes when someone mentions the name Richard Sterling, promise me you will listen before you judge." Nia read the sentence 3 times. Her mother had written those words years before her death. Somehow she had known this moment might arrive. The realization sent a chill through her. She barely slept that night. By sunrise, a small suitcase rested beside her front door. On Monday morning she boarded a flight from Chicago to New York. During the 2-hour trip, she watched clouds drift beneath the airplane wing and wondered how many secrets a single family could hide. Meanwhile, nearly 800 miles away, inside a glass tower overlooking Manhattan, several executives sat around a polished conference table discussing the future of Sterling Global Holdings. Richard Sterling's death had created uncertainty throughout the company. Investors wanted answers. Board members wanted control. Everyone expected a battle over the inheritance. What none of them knew was that the woman holding the answer was sitting quietly in seat 14A, staring out a window, completely unaware that her arrival was about to change the future of an empire. The car sent by the law firm waited at the curb when Nia stepped out of her Manhattan hotel the next morning. The city was already awake. Jeju taxis moved through crowded streets, pedestrians hurried across intersections, and towering Buildings reflected the early sunlight like walls of glass and gold. Nia sat quietly in the back seat as the driver guided the car toward Midtown. Every few blocks she caught sight of the Sterling name. Sterling Tower. Sterling Foundation. Sterling Financial Center. It was everywhere. The deeper they entered the city, the more impossible everything felt. 20 minutes later, the vehicle stopped in front of a skyscraper that seemed to disappear into the clouds. A polished silver sign near the entrance read Sterling Global Holdings. Employees moved through revolving doors carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Most never looked up. To them, it was just another workday. To Nia, it felt like stepping into a question that had waited her entire life for an answer. Inside, Michael Grant greeted her personally. He was older than she expected, with calm eyes and a measured voice that carried quiet authority. He shook her hand warmly. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Carter." Nia glanced around the executive floor as they walked. Original artwork lined the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. Every scene reflected power built over decades. Yet Michael seemed more interested in watching her reaction than showing off the building. Finally, they entered a private conference room. A folder rested at the center of the table. Michael sat across from her and folded his hands. "Before we discuss Mr. Sterling's estate," he said, "there is something you need to understand." He opened the folder and carefully slid several documents toward her. Nia lowered her eyes to the first page. Birth certificates. Family records. Legal correspondence. She read in silence. Then she stopped. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked up. "This cannot be right." Michael nodded gently. "We have verified every record multiple times." Nia stared at the documents again. The names connected in ways she had never imagined. Her mother had not simply known Richard Sterling. She had been related to him. For years, family disagreements, private decisions, and complicated circumstances had kept certain truths hidden from the public. Hidden from her. Richard Sterling had discovered the truth decades earlier. According to the records, he spent years trying to reconnect with the family branch he had lost contact with. He hired investigators. He funded searches. He followed leads across several states. But every attempt came too late. By the time he found one answer, another trail had disappeared. "Why did my mother never tell me?" Nia asked quietly. Michael looked toward the window before answering. "We believe she wanted you to build a life that belonged to you, not one shaped by someone else's wealth." Nia sat back in her chair. Suddenly memories felt different. Her mother's determination. Her insistence on independence. Her refusal to discuss certain parts of the past. Pieces that never fit now seemed connected. Michael reached for another document. "There is one more thing." Nia looked up. His expression changed slightly. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just serious. "The board believes they know how Mr. Sterling divided his estate." He paused. "They are very confident." Nia waited. Michael slid a sealed envelope across the table. "The problem is that none of them have seen the final instructions." Nia lowered her eyes to the envelope. Written across the front in elegant handwriting were 4 simple words. "To be opened by Nia Carter." For a long moment, Nia simply stared at the envelope. The room around her seemed to disappear. The skyline beyond the glass walls, the quiet hum of the air conditioning, even the distant sounds of conversations outside the conference room faded into the background. All she could see were the words written across the front. "To be opened by Nia Carter." The handwriting was elegant but unmistakably personal. Not the writing of a secretary. Not the writing of a lawyer. Someone had written her name intentionally. Carefully. As though they expected her to hold this envelope one day. Michael Grant gave her space. It did not rush her. It did not explain. He simply sat quietly while she broke the seal. Inside was a single folded letter. The paper felt heavier than she expected. Nia unfolded it and began to read. The first line immediately caught her breath. Dear Nia, if you are reading this, then I ran out of time. She stopped. Heiress. Move it back to the beginning. Then she continued. The letter was written by Richard Sterling himself. It did not begin with business. It did not mention money. Instead, he spoke about regret. It wrote about mistakes that could never be corrected. About family members lost through distance and silence. About years spent searching for people he should have found sooner. It described learning about Nia's existence far later than he should have. He admitted that by the time he understood the truth, circumstances had already pushed their lives onto separate paths. Nia continued reading. Richard wrote about her mother with respect and admiration. He described her as one of the strongest people he had ever known. Someone who valued dignity more than wealth. Someone who refused to let her identity be defined by privilege. Nia felt her throat tighten. The words sounded exactly like her mother. Then she reached the final page. Heiress slowed. Richard explained that many people expected his fortune to be divided among executives, distant relatives, charitable organizations, and board members. Those expectations were intentional. He had spent years allowing everyone to believe a certain version of the future. But the truth was different. According to the letter, his final wishes would not be revealed until a formal reading scheduled later that week. Nia looked up from the paper. What does this mean? She asked quietly. Michael slid a calendar across the table. 3 days from now, the board, senior executives, investors, and family representatives will gather for the official reading of the will. Nia looked back at the letter. And I am supposed to be there? Yes. Michael's answer was immediate. In fact, your presence is required. Nia stood and walked toward the window. Nearly 50 stories below, Manhattan moved with its usual energy. Thousands of people were living ordinary lives without realizing how quickly everything could change. I do not belong in that room, she said. Michael's reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. That is exactly what most people attending believe. Nia turned toward him. Something in his expression told her there was still more he was not saying. Then he added a sentence that made her pulse quicken. The people gathering for that meeting think they are coming to hear who receives portions of an empire. They boast. They do not yet realize they are about to learn who inherits all of it. The 3 days that followed felt strangely quiet. Not because nothing was happening, but because everything was happening behind closed doors. News outlets speculated endlessly about the future of Sterling Global Holdings. Financial analysts appeared on television predicting which executive would take control. Business magazines published articles ranking potential successors. Across New York, people debated the future of a company worth billions of dollars. Yet not a single report mentioned Nia Carter. Her name remained completely unknown to the public. Nia spent most of those days inside her hotel room overlooking the Hudson River. Every morning she woke before sunrise and reread her mother's letter. Every evening she studied the documents Michael Grant had provided. The facts never changed, but each reading made them feel more real. She was connected to a family she had never known. A family whose influence stretched across industries, cities, and generations. Still, the information felt distant. Like reading someone else's biography. On the morning of the will reading, a black sedan arrived shortly after 8 o'clock. Gray clouds drifted across the city, softening the sunlight between the skyscrapers. Nia stood in front of the hotel mirror for a moment before leaving. She wore a simple charcoal dress and a tailored jacket. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to impress. Her mother had always said that confidence should enter a room before wealth ever does. Nia carried those words with her as she stepped outside. Meanwhile, several miles away, the executive auditorium inside Sterling Global Holdings was already filling with guests. Board members arrived first. Senior executives followed. Investors, attorneys, advisors, and selected family representatives gradually took their seats. The atmosphere felt less like a memorial and more like a championship game before kickoff. Everyone expected an outcome. Everyone believed they understood the rules. Ethan Brooks was among them. 2 days earlier, his consulting firm had been invited to attend because of its growing relationship with Sterling Global. The invitation represented a career opportunity he could not ignore. Dressed in an expensive navy suit, Ethan moved confidently through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging business cards. He spoke with executives. Laughed with investors. Collected compliments about his recent success. More than once he imagined how different his life looked compared to a few years ago. Then, unexpectedly, a familiar name appeared in his thoughts. Nia. He quickly pushed the thought aside. The memory of the engagement party still pleased him. In his mind, that chapter of his life had already been settled. Across town, Nia's car approached Sterling Tower. As the vehicle slowed near the entrance, she noticed several news vans parked outside. Cameras stood ready. Reporters gathered near temporary barriers. Something about the scene made her stomach tighten. The event was larger than she had imagined. Michael Grant met her in a private entrance away from the crowd. He escorted her through a series of secured hallways and private elevators. Neither spoke much during the journey upward. Finally, they stopped outside a set of double doors. Voices could be heard on the other side. Hundreds of them. Michael adjusted his tie and looked at her carefully. Once these doors open, there is no way to return to anonymity. Nia took a slow breath. Then she nodded. Michael placed his hand on the door handle. Inside the auditorium, conversations continued. Investors checked their phones. Executives reviewed notes. Ethan laughed at something a colleague had said. None of them noticed the doors beginning to open behind them. The conversations inside the auditorium gradually softened as the doors opened. At first, very few people turned around. Most were focused on their own expectations. Board members reviewed documents. Investors checked financial updates. Executives whispered predictions to one another. They believed they already knew how the morning would unfold. Then Michael Grant stepped into the room. His presence alone was enough to attract attention. One by one, heads turned toward the entrance. The room became quieter. Nia followed a few steps behind him. She moved calmly, neither rushing nor hesitating. The sound of her heels against the polished floor echoed softly through the auditorium. Several guests looked at her with curiosity. Others barely noticed her at all. To them, she appeared to be another attorney, consultant, or distant family representative. Someone unimportant. Someone temporary. Ethan Brooks was halfway through a conversation with a senior executive when his eyes drifted toward the entrance. The moment he recognized Nia, his words stopped. For a second, he thought he was mistaken. Chicago felt far away. Their worlds were not supposed to overlap anymore. Yet there she was. Calm. Composed. Walking beside one of the most influential attorneys in the room. Ethan frowned slightly. Confusion replaced confidence. Why was she here? Around him, nobody seemed to know the answer. Michael guided Nia toward a reserved seat near the front. Not among the general guests. Not among assistants or observers. Near the stage itself. Several executives exchanged puzzled looks. One board member quietly leaned toward another. Neither recognized her. Yet clearly she had been given a place of importance. Ethan watched her sit down. The memory of the engagement party flashed through his mind. The laughter. The comments. The look on her face when he had introduced her to the crowd. She had appeared small that night. Out of place. Easy to dismiss. Somehow she looked different now. Not because of her clothes. Not because of wealth or status. There was simply a stillness about her that drew attention without asking for it. A few minutes later, the chairman of the board stepped onto the stage. The room settled into silence. Camille's position near the back prepared to record the proceedings. Rows of executives straightened in their seats. Everyone understood that the future of Sterling Global Holdings was about to be announced. The chairman delivered opening remarks about Richard Sterling's legacy. He spoke about leadership, vision, and decades of success. Then, he invited Michael Grant to begin the official reading of the will. Michael approached the podium carrying a leather folder. The room seemed to lean forward collectively. Expectations filled the air. Names circulated silently through people's minds. Senior executives. Family members. Charitable foundations. Powerful investors. Everyone anticipated receiving a piece of the empire. Michael adjusted his glasses and opened the folder. His voice remained steady. Profesional. Unemotional. He began reading several routine allocations. Donations. Trusts. Endowments. Various gifts and distributions. Nothing surprising. Nothing dramatic. The audience relaxed. Some executives even appeared relieved. Everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as expected. Then Michael turned to the final section. The room grew still once more. Ethan noticed movement near the front. Nia remained completely calm. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. She was not smiling. She was not nervous. She simply listened. Michael paused before reading the next line. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Then his voice echoed across the auditorium. The remainder of the Sterling estate, including controlling ownership of Sterling Global Holdings, shall transfer in its entirety to. Every eye lifted toward the stage. Every breath seemed suspended. Michael lowered his gaze to the page and spoke a name that instantly froze the room. Nia Carter. Nobody moved. For several seconds, the auditorium seemed trapped in complete silence. The name lingered in the air long after Michael Grant finished speaking. Hundreds of people sat frozen, as if they were waiting for a correction that never came. Some executives glanced at one another. Others immediately lowered their eyes to the documents in front of them, searching for an explanation. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He stared toward the front row, unable to process what he had just heard. Nia Carter. The same woman he had publicly dismissed only days earlier. The same woman everyone had overlooked. Michael allowed the silence to settle before continuing. Per the final instructions of Richard Sterling, all controlling shares, voting authority, and ownership interests associated with Sterling Global Holdings shall transfer solely to Nia Carter. A wave of whispers spread across the room. Investors exchanged stunned looks. Several board members visibly stiffened in their seats. One executive removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes as though rereading reality itself. Michael continued reading. Legal documents, certifications, and verified family records had all confirmed the decision. There would be no challenge. No ambiguity. No hidden clause. Richard Sterling had planned this carefully. Everything had been finalized months before his passing. Nia listened quietly. Her expression remained composed, but inside she felt the weight of every word. She thought about her mother. About the small apartment where she grew up. About years spent working ordinary jobs, paying ordinary bills, and building a life without expecting rescue from anyone. Nothing in her past had prepared her for this moment. Yet somehow, she felt less overwhelmed than everyone else in the room. Perhaps because she had never wanted any of it. Near the stage, one board member finally stood. His voice remained professional, but the strain beneath it was impossible to hide. Mr. Grant, are you confirming that Miss Carter becomes the majority owner of the entire organization? Michael looked directly at him. I am confirming that Miss Carter becomes the sole controlling heir of the Sterling estate. The answer landed like a thunderclap. More whispers erupted. Reporters seated near the back immediately reached for their phones. Messages began traveling through financial networks across New York. Within minutes, executives across the country would be hearing a name they had never heard before. Ethan could not take his eyes off Nia. Suddenly every memory felt different. Every assumption felt foolish. He remembered the engagement party. The laughter. The comments. The way she had simply walked away without defending herself. At the time, he thought her silence came from weakness. Now he was beginning to understand it may have come from strength. Michael closed the final document and stepped away from the podium. Then he turned toward Nia. Miss Carter, he said respectfully, on behalf of Richard Sterling's estate, welcome to your family's legacy. Slowly, every eye in the auditorium followed him. For the first time, the entire room was no longer looking at a stranger. They were looking at the woman who now owned the empire they had spent years trying to influence. The auditorium remained crowded long after the reading ended, but the energy had completely changed. The conversations that followed were no longer about speculation. They were about Nia. Executives who had never noticed her before suddenly wanted introductions. Investors wanted meetings. Advisors wanted appointments. Reporters wanted statements. Yet through all of it, Nia remained exactly as she had been when she first entered the room. Calm. Quiet. Unmoved by the attention. Michael Grant stayed beside her as she greeted a handful of people and signed several preliminary documents. Then, nearly an hour later, she finally stepped into the private hallway outside the auditorium. For the first time all day, there was silence. She exhaled slowly. The weight of the morning still felt unreal. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Nia. She turned. Ethan stood several feet away. Gone was the effortless confidence he carried at the engagement party. Gone was the amused smile. For a moment, he looked like a man struggling to understand how the world had changed so quickly. Neither spoke immediately. Ethan glanced down the hallway before looking back at her. I had no idea, he finally said. Nia held his gaze. I know. Ethan gave a small, uneasy laugh. If I am being honest, I do not even know what to say. Nia remembered the ballroom in Chicago. The laughter. The comments. The way he had looked through her instead of at her. Yet standing here now, she felt no anger. No desire to embarrass him. No need to prove anything. Life had already handled that conversation for her. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. You deserved better than the way I treated you. The words hung between them. Nia studied his face for a moment. Perhaps he meant them. Perhaps he truly regretted everything. But some realizations arrived too late to change the past. Maybe, she said softly. But I stopped needing that apology a long time ago. Ethan lowered his eyes. There was nothing left to argue with. Nothing left to explain. A few seconds later, Michael appeared at the far end of the hallway. A car was waiting downstairs. Several meetings had already been scheduled for the coming week. A new chapter was beginning. Nia offered Ethan a small smile. Not a triumphant smile. Not a cruel one. Used the smile of someone finally at peace. Then she turned and walked away. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. As the door slowly closed, Ethan remained where he was, watching in silence. For years he had believed success was measured by titles, money, and status. Only now did he understand what he had truly lost. The elevator descended toward the city below. Beyond the glass walls of Sterling Tower, Manhattan stretched endlessly into the distance. Opportunities. Possibilities. New beginnings. Nia looked out at the skyline and thought of her mother. The woman who had taught her dignity without wealth and strength without recognition. A gentle smile touched her lips. She had not won anyone back. She had not defeated anyone. She had simply become herself. And somehow, that was the greatest victory of all.